But as we get into that, we kept a lot saying, asking actually what is counted when you're looking at the budget. There was a lot of heated conversation in the morning when we were talking about figuring out the budget, when we were talking about materials and which one do you use from local providers or the ones you import. And many people, I and them helped us to know we could get funds, but again, it comes back to understand how do you quantify what you need to make sure that at the end of the day, everything is covered, and the balance that Alex mentioned is also incorporated in your project. So allow me to welcome Mr. Derek and his colleague. They will walk us through a very detailed way on now quantifying what we need. And I hope you're going to enjoy the session as much as you enjoyed the morning one. Please join me to welcome Derek with a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that it is Friday afternoon, it's 2 o'clock, but I promised my esteemed colleagues who are visiting me from Nairobi that it doesn't matter what the day of the week is, doesn't matter what the time of the day is, people in Rwanda are always ready to learn something new. Aren't we? There we go. All right, so I'll quickly introduce myself. Derek Kinkera, I'm the Associate Director for Turner & Townsend, and it is my distinct honor to sit alongside my colleagues and I ask them to introduce themselves shortly to present the masterclass on budgeting made simple. Our approach is going to be specifically addressing cost control and planning. We're going to talk a little bit about how we do cost control and planning at Turner & Townsend, and of course we're asking you to obviously relate that to whatever it is that you might be doing in a project. So I'll ask, well, just actually do this to go to the first slide, and I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am Purity Njagi, a cost manager sitting in the Nairobi office but supporting the East African business.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stuart Tier. I'm an Associate Director in our Nairobi office, but I support cost management projects across East Africa. I have experience in cost management in East Africa, the Middle East and the UK. And I'm also Vice Chair of the RICS East Africa Advisory Board.
Thank you, Stuart. So that's who we are. It would be good to also know who you are. So I'll just go over, and I think Alex had a very high-tech way of doing this in this morning. But how many in the room are architects, for example? Quite a few architects. How many of you are property owners or property developers? I see a few of you, okay. How many of you are cost managers or quantity surveyors? Oh, you decided to sit on the corner there, okay. And I hope you're all members of RIQS. All right, great. So we'll come back to that a bit later, but I think in terms of the flow and the contents we're going to be presenting, we have a short agenda. It's obviously talking about who we are. We're going to talk about what it is cost control and planning is. We'd like to discuss our approach to cost control and planning before going into a few key takeaways. We'll have a chance for Q&A at the end, and you can obviously ask us to come back to any of the slides that you want us to elaborate on. So who we are, Turner & Townsend is a global professional services company. We are present in over 43 countries with about 10 or 12,000, between 10 and 12,000 staff members. Now, our footprint in Africa includes, as you can see, countries like Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, across the middle and central and southern Africa. So we have operated in Rwanda for over 5 years with an office. However, we've been involved on projects for over 12 years. So that's, I think, just from the footprint and from the number of projects that we've been able to operate in, has given us the privilege of having access to quite a bit of information. Now that data is something that we harvest, we translate into something that we can share with the industries we work in to allow that information to be used to improve performance on projects. The examples of projects we've worked on in Rwanda include the Vision City Model Homes and Sales Complex. We've also worked on we are working on the Kigali Financial Business Square project. We have one and only Nyungwe, so it's projects across different portfolios in residential, commercial, in a little bit industrial and logistics. So again, we've used tried and trusted methods of cost planning and control to be able to deliver the service we do. I'll ask Stuart, or at least Purity, to maybe talk about what cost planning and control is.
All right. When we discuss cost planning and cost management, it's more of planning the cost of a construction or of a project from the beginning all the way to the end. And at this point, we are starting from coming up with a budget which we are going to ensure that we stick to it, or perhaps at the end of the day be slightly below the budget, and still ensure that we do not compromise on the quality or the utility aspect of the project. So what we do, we have different components of cost management, and we start with cost estimation. Cost estimation is where we start by creating a budget or a baseline cost of our construction project. And there are different ways in which we are going to come up with an estimate, and different ways that we are going to different factors that we are going to factor in this baseline figure. For instance, a project that is done in the city would be different from the cost of would be different from a project that would be done outside the city. Why? Because one, there is accessibility of labor and material. There is also the cost of transportation that we also have to incur. We also factor in different times. For instance, you find when there is a pandemic, for instance, back in Nairobi when there was a pandemic, there was a difference in VAT. So there are different regulations that affect different time zones and affect different times, and for that reason, it makes it very important to factor in different regulations that are at play when you're preparing these estimates. There are also different things like the design of a project, which is married to the client's brief, and it is very important for the developers to note that it is good to have the cost managers on board when you are doing the client's brief. One, because it would be key for us to advance or correct the design, the very initial design, when the architect is preparing the estimate. So what we do in the estimation, we pick the client's brief and we relate it with what has been prepared by the architect, and with that we are able to create an estimate. It would be different levels, which we're going to discuss later in the presentation, but that is how we are able to come up with a baseline figure that you're going to stick to it and ensure that we do not extend it further, or we're not going to go off the budget. Then there is also cost control. Cost control comes in different ways because as we have mentioned, is that we do not want to exceed this estimation or this budget that we have created. So there are many activities that will be done in the process of the design stage, and of course even after the contract stage and the construction stage, where we'll be ensuring that we protect our budget so that it does not exceed. Number 3, we have change management. It is almost obvious that each and every project encounters a few changes from the beginning to the end. So these are changes that are anticipated, and in most cases there is always an escalation factor that is provided during estimation, and at times we have a contingency that is provided. But then it's not just an open check for the design team and the contractor to use this amount that has been spared as a contingency. So what happens when the designs are being optimized, or during the construction stage, the changes that arise are discussed thoroughly to ensure that we do not kick off our budget. And at that moment, there is a lot of communication that happens, and that is what we refer to cost reporting. Whenever there is a change, we will ensure ensure that it is well communicated to all the stakeholders. We are also going to ensure that the client is comfortable with it. In fact, since the client is the boss in the project, he is the one who is going to give an approval of this change.
Thank you, Purity. I think I'll just recap on a couple of key things. I think it's establishing the baseline, right? And that's obviously going back to your estimate, controlling that baseline, protecting it, managing change, and reporting on that cost as the project goes. And we'll go into the details of that in just a bit. I think from our perspective, it's important that that baseline is as realistic as possible from day one. Now, to do that, you obviously need to apply certain methodologies. And I'll ask Stuart to speak to our methodology in a bit of detail, and we'll get into how that translates into a safe, secure, and reliable budget. The last point here is about owning the client's commercial agenda. Now, as cost managers or QSs, it's our job to really take that budget and make it our own, right? And understanding what that budget is going to give the client, what does the client actually value? Now, the architects might argue, you know, they like the nice finishes versus the functionality, right? And we heard about that this morning. But I think it's also, again, around managing threats, right? So that budget will be under threat from day one. From day one, there'll be potentially change. There'll be potentially a newer product coming online. There'll potentially be a change in desire. We talked this morning about a client going to Dubai and coming back to say, I want to do a hotel. But sometimes the threat is the architects, okay? So it's the cost manager and QS's job to, again, protect that client, protect the budget, by, again, working with the architect. I say that obviously in jest. I think it's a collaborative effort and really driving the client towards spending the money where they actually deem the value sits. Stuart, I'll ask you to maybe talk through our approach and maybe give the audience an example of how we approach this process.
Perfect, thanks, Derek. I think what I'll do is actually I'll start with the title of this masterclass, which is Budgeting Made Simple. Let me tell you now, budgeting isn't simple. So what we have at Turner & Townsend is we have a leading cost management methodology that we use globally, which helps us improve that. And it's a framework that encapsulates everything that we're trying to do throughout the project lifecycle. And obviously, I think going back to the point that Purity just raised, and obviously always make sure that we're achieving the client's commercial agenda. So our methodology, as you can see on the screen, is a methodology called TIC, or Target, Improve, Control, and Communicate. Each of these links directly to specific stages within the project lifecycle. And I'll come back to the communicate bit at the end, because as you'll notice, that's at the bottom, and it almost underpins the other 3 points that we have there. So where we start is with target, and that is with speaking to the client, understanding their key objectives, and really working with the client to understand the client's brief and where the money needs to be spent. I quite regularly speak to clients and turn around and speak to them and say, quantity surveying can be a relatively simple task, because what we can do is we can cost your design. Now, what happens in a lot of that situations is that budgets go far beyond where they need to be. What we like to do at Turner & Townsend is try and flip it the other way. By using our methodologies, our data, our information and the like, is we like to work with a client and tell them, for this type of building, you can get this. And when you get to that value, then we can work with the architects and the rest of the designers to design to that target cost. So it's important always to set your target at the beginning and align with the design principles that you're obviously going to go with. That, however, is only at the beginning, and this is construction, and everything obviously moves on. So therefore, we look to improve as we go along. So as we start at design process, we've probably got minimal design information. We'll set a budget based on data and benchmark information. As the design is developing, we can create more accurate costs, align those to the asset classes that we've got, and then we can refine what we're actually looking at. And we can speak to the client and say, look, at the moment you're allocating X amount of your money to this part of your development, and you're actually allocating Y amount of money to this part of your development. However, we go back to your initial point, because we know that needs to be flipped, and this is where we're going to look at. So then we finish on control. So control gives us a greater level of certainty. And a lot of people always refer to cost control as what's happening post-contract, but I would flip that and say cost control needs to start from the beginning. If you are setting your budget from day one, that needs to be controlled through cost plans, through communication, through meetings, through design changes, and value engineering. And then, as I said at the bottom there, we've got communicate, which I would argue is the most important thing when we're discussing cost management. As we said, throughout all of the design stages and throughout all meetings, we need to communicate back to the client and the rest of the stakeholders within the project about where your money is being spent. So we'll go on to the benefits of the TIC approach that we have, and hopefully I've just explained that well enough. There's a proven methodology. We deploy this globally, I think as Derek said, in over 50 countries across the world. It's a clear strategy. It's from day one right until the end. It's a cradle-to-grave approach. We have knowledge. We harness a lot of data in our industry, and we can apply that throughout the duration of the construction project. We train resources, assured outcomes, and the most important thing is that we always refer to market data to link back to ensure that we hit that cost budget.
Thank you, Stuart. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I think it's obviously important that this all relates, I think, to you all in whatever sphere you're operating in.